Before I go any further, I just want to say two things. First of all, I'm sorry that I haven't made a new video in like 2 months. College got crazy and finals came up and yada yada yada. And the second thing I want to say is that I will be talking about both Legendary Asia and Team Asia. However, they will each be in a different video as they are two very, very different games that come in the same box. With that being said, let's get started with Legendary Asia. Ticket to Ride Legendary Asia is a weird game for me, mostly because I have a really hard time collecting my thoughts on it. With most of the Ticket to Ride games, at least the ones that I've played more than once, I generally know how I feel about them. At the start of brainstorming for this video, and even writing the script, I really had no idea how I felt about it. Even after playing it a few more times, I still had no idea what stuck out to me about it. That's not to say that there isn't a game here, because there is, and eventually I found it. But I think that uncertainty is an important part of both this map and the Team Asia map. I don't see these games talked about too often, and they are often overshadowed by the bigger games. America, Europe, and people shitting on Switzerland. And of course, this dumpster fire. The point is, both of these games don't really have a popular opinion on them. I think it's time that they get their time to shine. So without further ado, let's get into this crazy analysis. In 2011, Days of Wonder announced a Ticket to Ride map design contest, and the winner would have their game published and get a cash prize of $10,000, which could pay for a decent chunk of my student debt, by the way, so hit me up. The winner was Francois Valentine, making it the first Ticket to Ride game published not by Alan R. Moon. This is important to keep in mind because some of the design choices that Francois made, Alan may have not. I'm not too sure what Francois' philosophy on design is or was, but he was definitely a min-maxer. Or at least I think he was. If he isn't, that would be super embarrassing. While Alan is obsessed with trying out new mechanics to make each game feel like a unique experience, Francois seemed to focus on making the best possible version of Ticket to Ride, while only adding in mechanics to enhance the game. If Switzerland is a jumbled mess of good ideas, Legendary Asia is taking every idea that Alan had up to this point in design, basically taking the good ones and throwing away the bad ones. There are two very, and I cannot stress this enough, very small new mechanics in this game that are very elegant. Alan's designs are usually huge changes that define the game that they are in, so you don't forget about them. When you think of Europe, you think of lots of tunnels and stations. When you think of rails and sails, you think harbors and your will to live. When you think of Legendary Asia, you think, that's the one where you discard extra trains, I think? At least that's how it was for me. This isn't a bad thing, it just means that the new mechanics are a little bit more subtle. So, what are these new subtle mechanics anyway? Well, I'm not going to answer that question, and I'm going to start off with the old mechanics that are included in this game. The old mechanics that make a return in Legendary Asia are the long and short routes being dealt at the start of the game, and the inclusion of the ferries. These are two main banger mechanics from Europe that objectively make the game better, in my opinion. Min-maxers can celebrate, as he chose not to include tunnels in his map, and also not making a return to Legendary Asia are the countries. The countries are a good mechanic in some games, but I'm really glad that it was left out of Legendary Asia. Legendary Asia is all about subtlety, and I think that adding the countries wouldn't necessarily complicate the game, but it would bog down the gameplay. To recap my Europe video, go watch that if you haven't, adding in ferries gives players a bigger incentive to take locomotives, which adds more card flow, which is good. The long routes at the start of the game essentially cut the board into a few different strategies, helping balance out the board quite a bit. All in all, this is the best base set of added mechanics so far. So finally, let's talk about a new mechanic. The mountains change the pace of the entire game. A mountain route is a route that has X's over all or some of its spaces. When you take these routes, for each space on that route that is a mountain, you must burn a train. And when I say burn, I mean essentially that you just have to get rid of it or destroy it, whatever wordage you want to use. But for the rest of this video, I will be referring to that mechanic as train burn, or just burn. Anyway, for each train that you burn, you get 2 extra points for that route. So a 2-length route where both spaces are mountains, you get 6 points. 2 for the route and 4 for the 2 trains that you burned. At first, this mechanic seems pretty pointless. Even after playing a game, one of my friends said said, the train burning seems pretty pointless. I really hope that I never have to play Rails and Sails again. I didn't think that they had much of an impact either, and then I played the game again, and again, and again, and then the impact of the mountains hit me. The mountains are one of, if not the best mechanism for balancing long routes and short routes, as well as controlling the pace of the game. Controlling long routes and short routes is extremely difficult to do. America is one of the best examples of this, where the board is pretty lopsided with long routes, which can have a player pull significantly ahead. The mountains balance this by getting more points for a much smaller amount of resources, on the condition that you must sacrifice your supply to get points. For example, in a game I played recently, someone had burned 13 trains at the end of the game. This means they got 26 points in total from train burn. With these 13 trains, they could have taken 2 6-length routes, which could have totaled to 30 points, although there is only one 6-length route on the board. However, had they not burned their trains, they could have completed more route cards, which would have resulted in even more points. So although the 6 points for 2 trains route seem like a super point efficient move, the burning of trains builds up and can often actually end up being inefficient. This makes the entire game a huge balancing act of efficiently using your trains. Let me repeat that. Balancing your trains. In my example from before, with the length of 2 route giving 6 points, although you could have used those trains for something later, those who do not take those routes are also pressured by the ticking time bomb of you ending the game. The mountain mechanic creates a beautiful push-pull of playing fast to end the game as quickly as possible versus trying to complete as many routes as you can in the time given by the player who is burning his entire pool of trains. In Legendary Asia, you have to be thinking about the end of the game the whole time. This creates an unrivaled sense of tension because your time to fix your errors is little to none. The game can really end whenever someone gets down to around 10 trains. This is the kind of mechanic that Switzerland so desperately needed. It creates a competitive environment where players must rush for their spot on the board, or else they will be cut out of the game completely. The bonus card for this game isn't the longest route card or the most routes completed. In Legendary Asia, the end of the game bonus is the most cities hit by one network of trains. This is a small but needed change for the end of the game bonus. Because of the burning of trains, a smaller pool of players would be able to get the longest route. This change helps players who go for the mountain strategy more than the routes strategy, since they will, in theory, get less points in routes, allowing them to pick up 10 extra points at the end of the game. Overall, I do think that the mechanics in this game are very well done and polished. However, I do have my own problems with them, which I will get into now. Just like every other game in the world, I have my own share of problems with this board. Here are a few issues I have with it, which are more or less all nitpicks. There is a middle part of this board that is just a total and complete clusterfuck. I don't know why the routes between the cities were set up in the way that they were, but there are 2 routes of length 2 going into Ager, I don't know really what the pronunciation of that city is. Anyway, but there are 2 routes going into that city on a 50-degree angle, and then the 2 cities that they connect to are connected to a 3-length yellow route. Playing this game with physical pieces becomes very confusing very quickly in that area. I understand why these routes are the way that they are, as the board can become very cutthroat very quickly. Players do need backup routes. Overall, the entire board is kind of like this though. The middle part of the board is just the worst offender of it. There are so many seemingly randomly placed routes on the board with little to no rhyme or reason. There are also so many choke points on the board, especially if you play with 3 people, where a lot of the double routes become single routes. Almost every route on the board is a double route, so this makes the board much smaller. With that being said though, I can't even imagine playing this board with 5 people. It's just too small, and it gets crowded with 3 alone, or 4 alone really. This board just feels clustered and kind of ugly. This, I would assume, is due to the game being slight chaos with the mountains, but the route placement could use some fine tuning for sure. The other issue I have with the game is actually quite a big one, and will have the most effect on its placing at the end of this video. The biggest drawback of Francois' design, and the biggest advantage of Alan's design, are, well, this isn't going to be very scientific, but it's oomph factor. What I mean by this is that Although Legendary Asia is ridiculously defined, the game doesn't stand out or have anything that makes it inherently more fun than any of the other games. I find that Europe and America are much more expansive than Legendary Asia. They both have much more balanced boards, and Europe has a ton of new mechanics that, whether you like them or not, I do think make the game more exciting. The mountains are a really good mechanic in terms of game design, and they do play well, but they don't excite me enough in order to play the game over and over again, which a lot of the other games do. That's a huge problem because the game's just not as fun as some of the other games, and fun is why you play in the first place. There are other Ticket to Ride maps that are way less refined than this one, but I'd still rather play them because it feels less cut and dry. Even Rails and Sails has more personality than this game, which is saying a lot. The point is, yes, the game is designed super well, but it isn't as fun to play as many of the other games, which is kinda sad. As per usual, I'm going to be ranking these games in two ways: what I would want to play on a given day, and what I think is good in terms of game design. In terms of wanting to play this game on a given day, or how much fun I have with it, I think the mountains make the game exciting at first, but kind of lose their oomph over time, and they don't really draw me back to the game. They play well, and the map is fun at first, but I can't say that I would ever choose it over Europe or America. Those two games, although more flawed than Legendary Asia, play better than Legendary Asia on replays. In terms of design, Legendary Asia almost perfects the base Ticket to Ride formula. It creates tension better than every game I've reviewed so far, but falls short in terms of its actual board, which is just ugly. It's truly astounding how Francois was able to make such a small change that just changed the game completely. However, like I mentioned before, it struggles to find and land its own identity and draw me back for replays because the mountains just get dry after a while. I think that on paper, Legendary Asia is the best game that I have reviewed so far. I'm going to be putting Legendary Asia in the B tier. Originally, I was going to move America down into B tier and have this game in the A tier, but something just didn't sit right with me on that. Going back into my intro, I couldn't quite place what I didn't like about the game. While editing, however, it really hit me that just because a game has fewer flaws than another game, in theory at least, that doesn't make it better. For example, the Mario Party franchise is one of my favorite game series, and it is really flawed. But even with those, the game is super fun, and I enjoy it for what it is, all its jank included. With Legendary Asia, I just don't feel like I ever have that opportunity to go for that super weird strategy. There isn't a very inherent excitement of getting rid of your train. I'll even give it to Rails and Sails. Drawing that route card that has the same name of a city you already have is exciting. And I think that Legendary Asia lacks moments like that, other than someone ending the game suddenly, which, although exciting, isn't exciting enough to form an identity around the game. I know I've been shitting on Legendary Asia a lot in the last few minutes, but I do really think it's good, and it is still fun. Ticket to Ride in general is fun. It's a fun game, and it is designed really well, but it simply isn't as fun as some of the other Ticket games. And with that, that is Legendary Asia. Next will be Team Asia, which is another game that just hasn't really been talked about. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you've watched this far, I really appreciate it. Subscribe so I can fucking drop out, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.